In this video, Claude will compete against ChatGPT in chess. Let's go. Hi, now I'll explain how everything will work. First, I'll randomly choose who will play as white. So Claude plays white. Claude makes his move, I send it to ChatGPT, and he makes his move, and so on in turns. They will also comment on their actions. Let's watch.
Classic king's pawn opening. Controls the center and opens lines for the bishop and queen.
I respond symmetrically to control the center early.
Developing the knight, attacking black's e5 pawn, and preparing kingside castling.
I develop a knight to defend the e5 pawn and increase central control.
The Ruy Lopez, Spanish opening. Pinning the knight and putting long-term pressure on black's center.
I challenge the bishop immediately to question its intent on the diagonal.
Keeping the pin on the knight while retreating to safety along the a4-e8 diagonal.
I develop a knight while increasing pressure on the central e4 pawn.
Castling for king safety? Sacrificing the e4 pawn temporarily is a well-known theoretical idea here.
I prepare to castle and reinforce king safety while staying flexible in the center.
Rook to the open e-file, defending e4 and preparing the main line with c3 and d4.
I gain space on the queen side and force the bishop to stay passive.
Retreating the bishop to b3, where it still eyes the f7 square, black's weakest point.
I solidify the e5 pawn and prepare a stable central structure.
Preparing d2, d4 to break in the center, and giving the bishop a retreat square on c2.
I complete king safety and prepare to activate my rook in central breaks.
Preventing the annoying bg4 pin before pushing d2, d4. A classic prophylactic move in the Ruy Lopez.
I prevent any piece from landing on g5 and create luft for my king.
Striking in the center, challenging black's e5 pawn and opening lines for my pieces.
I capture in the center to open lines and challenge white's strong pawn expansion.
Recapturing with the c3 pawn. Now I have a strong pawn duo on d4 and e4, controlling the center.
Fault.
You have the question, what is this? This is an error. The AI thinks such a move is possible, but it's not. So this move is not accepted, and I inform the AI about it. After reanalysis, I get a different move.
I capture on e4 to eliminate the advanced central pawn and simplify the center.
Recapturing the knight with the rook. Material is restored, and my rook becomes very active on the e-file.
I develop my bishop with tempo, targeting the rook on e4 and activating my pieces.
Retreating the rook to safety on e1, keeping control of the open e-file.
I retreat the bishop to a safe diagonal while keeping pressure on the e4-d3 complex.
Developing the last minor piece, bringing the knight into the game and preparing to coordinate all my forces.
I reroute my knight to the rim, aiming at the c4 square and pressure on the bishop on b3.
Saving the strong bishop by retreating to c2, where it stays on the active b1-h7 diagonal, aimed at black's king.
I place the knight on a strong outpost, attacking key central and queenside squares.
Kicking the knight away from c4 and preparing to develop the dark-squared bishop via b2, fianchetto setup.
I invade deep into white's position, targeting coordination issues and attacking key central squares.
qd1 x b2. Fault. qd1 e2. Moving the queen to safety and developing it. The trapped-looking knight on b2 can still escape via a4, but I've kept material balance.
I challenge white's central structure to open lines and activate my pieces.
Capturing the c-pawn, opening lines and threatening to trap the b2 knight afterward with nc3 a4.
I recapture in the center to keep material balance and maintain central presence.
Cutting off the knight's escape via d1. Now, after rook a1 b1 next move, the knight on b2 will be trapped.
I connect my rooks and reinforce control over the center and the c-file.
Attacking the knight on b2. If it runs to a4, I take it with my knight and stay up material.
c5 x d4. Fault. Rook a8, rd8. I activate my rook to the open file and increase pressure on the center and d-file.
Finally capturing the trapped knight. Even if black takes my rook on d1, I recapture with the queen and stay up a full piece.
a6 x b5. Fault. Queen c7, queen d6. I reposition my queen to centralize and support both defense and queenside control.
Raising the queen for a rook. Even after black recaptures with the rook, I win queen for rook, a huge material advantage.
Bishop c8, e6. Fault. Knight c4, b2. Fault. Queen c7, e5. Fault. Rook f8, e8. I centralize the rook and prepare to challenge the invading rook on the d-file.
Grabbing another free pawn. Black has no defenders for a6, and my material advantage keeps growing.
Knight f6, d7. Fault. Rook d8, d7. I activate the rook to challenge the invading white rook on a6 and defend the 7th rank.
Trading bishops to shatter black's kingside pawn structure and expose the king to attack.
Bishop e7, g5. Fault. Queen c7, d7. Fault.
Right now, ChatGPT is making a lot of impossible moves. He's gotten confused and no longer knows where his pieces are. So I'm forced to give him information about where the pieces are on the board.
Rook e8, d8. I activate the rook on the open file and target the advanced white rook on a6 while coordinating both rooks.
Retreating the bishop to a powerful diagonal aimed at black's king, maintaining my crushing material advantage.
I create luft for the king and restrict white's bishop activity on the long diagonal.
The knight invades the center, attacking the undefended bishop on e7, winning more material.
Rook e8, d5. Fault. Rook e8, d5. I capture the advanced knight on d5 and eliminate white's central control piece.
Saving my bishop while grabbing another pawn. The attack on black continues with overwhelming material advantage.
I capture on d1 with check to activate the rook and create immediate pressure on the white king.
Sidestepping the check, the king goes to h2 where it's safe, and my huge material advantage remains intact.
I activate the rook from the back rank to the 2nd rank, creating threats against white's king and pawns.
Capturing the attacking rook. Even after the recapture sequence, I'll be up 2 rooks for a knight, completely crushing.
I capture the knight on d2 and eliminate the strong centralized white piece.
Recapturing with the queen, centralizing for the final assault on black's exposed king.
Rook d2, f2. Fault. King f8. I improve the king's safety and connect the position by stepping off the back rank.
Check! Forcing the bishop to block on d8, after which I'll capture it and finish off the game.
I move the king out of g8 to g7.
Check on the long diagonal. Black must block or move the king, after which I'll continue tearing apart the position.
King f6. Fault. f7, f6. I block the check from the queen by interposing the pawn on f6.
Doubling on the d-file with crushing pressure, preparing decisive attacks against black's exposed king.
f6, f5. Fault.
Just look at this move. This is a fault. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like. Thank you.
kf7. The king steps toward the center, escaping passive placement on g7 and connecting with pawns and bishop.
Check from the bishop on the long diagonal. The king is forced back to g7 with no good defense. The mating net is closing.
ke7. Fault.
ChatGPT got confused again. I'm giving him the information once more. Count and write in the comments how many times we saw fault.
kg7. The king steps back to g7 to avoid tactics on the f-file and stay near the pawn structure.
Attacking the bishop with my rook, supported by the queen. Black has no good defense and will lose more material.
The king steps back to f8, improving safety and keeping flexibility behind the pawn structure.
Check! Forcing the king back to g7, gaining a tempo to coordinate my final attack.
The king steps from f8 to g7, improving its safety by moving closer to the pawn shield and reducing exposure to central and diagonal threats.
Attacking the bishop. Black must move it, and most squares lose material or position.
The king retreats to f8 to stay safe behind the pawn shield and avoid tactical lines from the center. The bishop from e7 captures the white queen on d6, eliminating the strongest attacking piece.
Recapturing the bishop. I lost the queen, but still have 2 rooks and a bishop against just pawns. Easy technical win ahead.
The king moves back to g7, staying behind the pawn shield and avoiding rook pressure on the d-file.
Check! Driving the king to the back rank to begin the standard mating technique with 2 rooks.
kf7. Fault. kh8. The king steps to h8, moving away from the rook's file and staying behind the pawn shield.
Centralizing the bishop to control key squares around the king, preparing to bring the second rook to the 8th rank for the final mating attack.
The pawn advances to challenge white's control of the center and try to create counterplay on the king's side.
The bishop closes in on the king, threatening bxg6 to break up black's last defenses on the king's side.
The king steps to g7, moving toward the center and supporting the pawn chain while staying behind the shield.
Discovered check. The bishop moves and reveals my rook's attack on the king. Black must move the king to a worse square.
The king moves from g7 to f6, escaping the diagonal attack from the bishop on e8.
Check. Forcing the king further from defensive positions. Black's king is in the open and lacks any safe haven.
The king steps back to g7, escaping the rook's attack along the d-file.
Check from the rook on the 7th rank, forcing the king back while maintaining a crushing material advantage.
The king retreats to h8, stepping out of the rook's file and returning behind the pawn shield.
The bishop moves to f7, attacking g6 pawn and controlling key squares, preparing decisive threats while keeping the king cornered.
g5, g4. Fault. g6, g5. The pawn advances to gain space and try to create any counterplay on the king's side.
Bishop seizes the key square, controlling h7 and locking the king in the corner, preparing the final blow.
The pawn advances to challenge white's kingside structure and try to create space for counterplay.
Capturing the pawn. Bishop safe. Mating net tightens.
The king steps from h8 to g8, improving safety and staying close to the pawn structure.
Check. The king has no good squares. Checking option kh7. Nothing attacks it. Not mate, but gaining tempo.
kf7. Fault. kh7. The king retreats to h7, staying tucked behind the pawn shield and avoiding central tactics.
Check. Cutting the king off from the 7th rank. Preparing coordination.
The king moves back to g8, escaping the rook's attack along the 7th rank.
Bishop check. The king's only legal move is kh8. kxf7 is impossible. The bishop is defended by the rook on d7.
The king steps from g8 to f8, escaping the diagonal attack from the bishop on f7.
Bishop retreats to safety. The rook on d7 still controls the 7th rank, and the king on f8 is squeezed.
The king returns from f8 to g8, staying close to the pawn structure and avoiding immediate tactical threats.
Freeing the b2 rook. Next move, I'll swing it to the 8th rank for the 2-rook mating technique.
The pawn advances to gain space on the queen side and try to create counterplay by attacking white's pawn structure.
Rook activates. Next move, rb3 g3 plus or rb3 h3 h8 to transfer to the 8th rank for mate.
The pawn pushes forward, gaining space and trying to open lines toward the white king and restrict white's pieces.
rb3 b8 plus. Fault. rb3 e3. Preparing re3 e8 plus for mate next move.
The pawn advances, attempting to create threats on the king side and limit white's rook activity on the e-file.
Checkmate. Coordination of 2 rooks and the bishop traps the black king with no escape. Final. Checkmate. White wins.
Claude won! Congratulations! Honestly, this was clear after ChatGPT got confused and couldn't figure out where the pieces were on the board.
I'm reading the comments. Write which AI competition you want to see next. Leave your comment below. Bye, everyone.